What's up, guys? Welcome back to Checkerboard Chat, the official sports podcast of the Daily Beacon. I'm Blake Von Hagen, the sports editor. He's Will Backus, the assistant sports editor. We're here with Corey Sanning and Noah Taylor, and today we're going to recap the Tennessee men's basketball season and talk about the Lady Vols coaching search. All right, we'll start off with the men this time. We were there for that Purdue loss in the Sweet 16 that brought the season to a close. Kind of weird emotions after that game. Obviously, Admiral Schofield mentioned that it was a successful season in some ways, making it to the Sweet 16. None of the players had ever done that before. But at the same time, you go in the locker room and you can obviously tell that those guys were disappointed in the finish and they wanted more than a Sweet 16. They ran into kind of a buzzsaw there with what Ryan Klein did. Just kind of talk about that game and what you saw from that game.
Well, I mean, it was what the performance Purdue put on was, quite frankly, especially Ryan Klein, was unbelievable. He went 7 of 10 from three. He was 10 of 13 from the field. This coming from a guy who averages 12 points a game, and he's no slouch whatsoever. But to see him hit shots like that and those moments on that stage, it was unbelievable to see. Tennessee at the end, I think they just ran out of gas. When you have to come back from an 18-point second-half deficit, I mean, we saw this in the SEC title game last year when they had to fight back from 17 down against Kentucky. They just didn't have enough to finish at the end. Ideally, they would have liked to finish that game in regulation. Lamonte Turner fouls Carson Edwards on the three. Luckily, the game didn't end right there. Luckily, he missed one of the he only hit 2 or 3 free throws. But at the end of the day, yes, at the end of the day, people are going to look back and say this was a disappointing season because while they won 31 games, while they, had a 19-game win streak at one point, they have nothing set in stone to show for it. They have no Elite Eight appearance. They can put a little, 2019 up on that Sweet 16 banner they got hanging in Thompson Bowling Arena. But at the end of the day, Admiral Schofield said they wanted, to start the season, they wanted to bring home some hardware. They did none of that.
I've seen and heard a lot of people say that was one of the worst games Tennessee's played this year. And personally, I don't think it was even close to one of the worst games they played this year. I thought, you give up 99 points in the game, it's hard to say that the defense was good or even adequate, but I think the defense against Auburn, when you give up 84, was even worse than the defense against Purdue. It's just Carson Edwards in the first half was hitting shots with people all over him. Ryan Klein was doing the same thing in the second half and really the whole game. And I don't know if the Virginia-Purdue game makes Tennessee feel any better. I'm sure it doesn't, but Purdue played really well in that game too and probably should have won that game if not for a miracle at the end for Virginia. So it's March Madness. It's a who's hot tournament. I've said that before in here, and that kind of thing happens. But what you want is to build a program that has consistency, and I think that's Tennessee is beginning to do that, and they've done that the last 4 years under Rick Barnes. So I think this was another stepping stone. And now we'll talk about it later, but if Grant Williams and Jordan Bone both come back next season, it could be an even more successful season in the postseason. But for now, we'll talk about the Lady Vols coaching search underway now. Last week, we filmed a day too early because we didn't know if Holly Warlick was for sure going to be fired. We thought that was likely, but now she has been fired, and they're going through a coaching search. So kind of talk about who the main people are they're looking at for that.
Well, at first it was Jeff Waltz because, it was reported even before Holly Warlick was fired that Tennessee had a lot of interest in Jeff Waltz, and that they even reached out to Louisville about kind of in talks about that. And it was kind of reported that it might be a done deal anyway. But that kind of talk is backed off. Of course, Louisville lost in the tournament a couple days ago. So if there was a deal done, then I'd imagine an announcement probably would have already been made by now because it's been a couple days since they lost. But nothing's happened there. Now the hot name is Kelly Harper or Kelly Jolly. She played for Tennessee in the late 90s. She was a very good point guard for them. Went on to play in the WNBA for a while. Now she's the coach at Missouri State. She took them to a Sweet 16, their first Sweet 16 since 2001. They lost to Stanford, which, it's still impressive that she took a team like Missouri State to the Sweet 16. She's had stops before at NC State and I believe Eastern Carolina University. She's one of 11 coaches to take 3 different teams to the tournament. But it wouldn't be as high profile a hire as Jeff Waltz, just because, Waltz, like I said, would probably turn Tennessee into a national title competitor within the first couple of years of him being hired. Kelly Harper is going to be the kind of coach that's going to get it done gradually. She's shown gradual improvement as Missouri State's head coach. It hasn't been immediate. She's upped her win totals each year in her 4 years there. Started out, I think, her first season, she didn't even reach 10 wins, and then came out and got, double-digit figures in 20. And then this year she had 20 more than she had last year. So it'll be a gradual process with her. She's the front runner right now. There are really no other names that have had as much traction as her in the past couple days. Apparently, Tennessee has reached out to, or Missouri State's athletic director himself said that Tennessee has reached out to him about Kelly Harper. So she's the front runner so far.
And to save Noah from kind of having to reiterate the same thing, I'll ask a new question. And also, it's Tuesday night right now, so that's when we're filming. We might look dumb again, as we've done this year, and the news comes out later tonight and before this is posted. But as of now, we don't know who the coach will be. So, I mean, Noah, what do you think the coaching hire would be if it was Harper? What kind of grade would you give that compared to maybe a Jeff Walsh?
Well, I think the Jeff Walsh thing, kind of when that news broke, I mean, that you kind of thought, wow, that's Fulmer's really going out here and getting a coach who I think would make an immediate impact. And I think that's kind of what the Lady Vols program needs right now. The recruiting's there, the talent's there. What they need is somebody that can come in and put them back on the map. I think all the resources are there to do that. I think Harper, you get a connection again, like you had with Holly Warlick. You have that connection to Pat Summitt still. And that's one thing I know a lot of fans like. She played here, so there's that factor as well. But I think it's a little underwhelming compared to what they would get with Walls or somebody like Walls. So overall, I would say at this point, they don't really need to take a chance on an up-and-comer. And I kind of feel like that's what she would be at this point. Maybe it would work out. Like Will said, she's gotten more consistent and has taken 3 teams in the tournament, went to the Sweet 16 this year and gave Stanford a fight in the Sweet 16. So I think overall it would be a little bit of an underwhelming hire, and I don't think Tennessee can afford to maybe take a chance on somebody at this moment. They need somebody that can come in and win immediately. I think you get that with Walls. I think Harper's probably too much of a mystery right now.
We'll shift gears back to the men's team for a little bit now, just to talk about kind of going forward and a little bit more recap of the season. Like you said, no hardware to take home this year for Tennessee. Made it to the Sweet 16, but at the end of the day, that's just a number on a banner in Thompson Bowling. That's not the number they're looking for. And then, ironically enough, Bruce Pearl, Tennessee's former coach, is now playing in the Final Four.
Absolutely.
Coaching the Final Four. So that's kind of an interesting development, as I've seen a lot of Tennessee fans not too pleased with that situation.
No.
But if you had to kind of grade Rick Barnes this season, and you wrote the season grades, was that yesterday? I think it was. Make sure to check his season grades out, letter grade for each position group this season. But what would you kind of give the grade to Rick Barnes and the job he did this year at the end of the day, losing the Sweet 16?
I believe, if I believe so, outside of Tennessee's front court, Rick Barnes, I think, was the only one that got above B. And it's hard to sit back and look, say, that he didn't do a good job, because he had them prepared for most situations. They showed a lot of fight in that Purdue game, no matter what people want to say. I mean, if Ryan Klein doesn't get hot and make unbelievable shots, we're probably sitting here having a totally different conversation. But I think Rick Barnes, I'd say if I would have to give him a grade on this season, I'd say, it could be, A minus, B plus. I don't think you can go wrong with either of those, because you look at it, he was named National Coach of the Year by the U.S. Basketball Writers Association. And no, he probably won't earn the AP Coach of the Year award. I think that was, well warranted. I think he did a good job of getting his team prepared, And obviously Tennessee, this team didn't have, none of them were highly recruited coming out of high school. And he was able to get them to gel together, come together, and, end of the day, they're one of the 8 best teams in college basketball this year, no matter what you can, I agree with you. I don't think the best team usually ever wins March Madness. It's always a time of the year when the hottest team, usually makes the best run. But, Rick Barnes, Rob Lanier, Desmond Oliver, they got a really good staff. It's something that they can build on from here going forward, unless Rob Lanier maybe gets a head coaching offer somewhere else, which he's reportedly turned down offers to stay here with Rick Barnes. So it'll be interesting to see going forward, because I think the coaching staff, they've got the right message in place. And if I had to give Rick Barnes and his staff one grade for this season, I would go an A minus.
Yeah, and at Texas, the reason he didn't work out there in the end is they weren't happy with the postseason success, even though he was making it every year. I do think it's an important distinction that this is different, because he's still building this program, and Tennessee historically has not been a team that's making runs to the Final Four. Never made a Final Four before, only made one Elite Eight. So to make the Sweet 16 is a really big deal for Tennessee. At the end of the day, I do think it's a disappointment because of the talent they had on this team. And like some of the players said after the game, we'll never have this team again. So it'll be different. It could be better, but this team had pieces. We saw today that Grant Williams was an All-American.
Yep.
Admiral Schofield earned honorable mention. Grant Williams was first team. So this team was really good, and this team could have won a national championship. It's March Madness. You never know what's going to happen. So that's I don't know. I'd probably give Rick Barnes a B this year because you do have to look at what happens in March Madness. You do have to look at what happens in the regular season. They didn't close it out there. They didn't close out the SEC tournament. Didn't close it out in March Madness. But yeah, it's another step for Tennessee. It's something they can build on going forward. You guys didn't cover the team, but you watched a lot of Tennessee basketball this year in March Madness. What would you guys kind of think of the job Rick Barnes did?
I mean, yeah, he did mold a bunch of players that were outside of the top 100 in the nation into a national championship caliber team, and that's impressive. That's a testament to how good he is as a coach and a developer of players. They did underachieve this year. They didn't necessarily meet the standard, but I still think it was a pretty decent year, 31 wins, more than a decent year, 31 wins, and then you've got, first team All-American on your team, Admiral Schofield, who's an honorable mention All-American, so I'd probably give him a B. They didn't bring home any hardware, but they had a decent season. They were consistently one of the top 5 teams in the nation. Probably you could still make the argument that they're still a top 10 team in the nation. They just got caught, by a hot team that hit shots in the postseason. So it's not just the postseason that you should take into account. It should be the season as a whole, and it was a pretty good season for Tennessee basketball.
Yeah, I'd go B+. I think that it's like you said. I think that kind of basing the entire season off one weekend is a little harsh because, overall, what he did with the team and plus the build, he didn't come into a good situation, and it's taken some time. But here we are at Sweet 16 run. A lot of teams would kill to make it that far in the postseason. So, yeah, I'd go with a B+ overall, and sure that they probably should have gone farther. I think that they had a national title caliber team, but yeah, I'd say B+.
I think I set the bar a little too high.
Yeah.
And Duke's a national caliber team.
Right.
They didn't make the Final Four either, so that thing happens. And one more thing on the Purdue game, well, 2 things on that. It's interesting in a couple of different ways, and one is that they lose to a team that hits a bunch of threes because that had been a problem all season. But the funny thing about it is they really played pretty good perimeter defense against Purdue. Klein got open on a few shots near the top of the key, but besides that, a lot of those were a hand in his face, and he was getting them off. And Carson Edwards had no breathing room. He was getting shots off. I think Lamonte Turner did a pretty good job on him. So it's kind of ironic for Tennessee that that's how the season ends. But that's the kind of thing that happens. It's a 1-game sample size, and you can't really take too much from it. And the other thing is Rick Barnes. The knock on him has been his postseason coaching. I don't think he coached poorly this postseason, but yet he still lost, and it's easy to kind of look back at the past in that kind of situation, but I think that might not apply this year. So, yeah, I think overall he did a decent job this season, and then we'll talk more a little later about next season. But jumping back into the Lady Vols thing, Noah kind of gave his thoughts on what kind of hire Harper would be. What would you think about that hire?
Yeah, I think it would be underwhelming, especially after all the Jeff Walz news, and I completely agree with what he said with Tennessee needs someone that can come in and win now. They don't need someone that's going to, build the program slowly because they have the talent to win now. I mean, they've got 3 straight top 5 recruiting classes on their team right now. They've got such talented players like Avina Westbrook and Renaya Davis, and even a few of the freshmen, Zay Green, Mimi Collins showed flashes this year. So they need someone that's going to be able to come in and get them to 20 wins in their first season or 25 wins in their first season. Someone who's going to have them, pretty deep into the tournament and maybe even in national title talks in his first year. That might be asking a lot, but they have such a talented team that it's not a big rebuild for whatever coach that comes in here. The coach that comes in is probably going to be expected to win now because it's not like they're starting from the ground up. The program isn't in shambles. Holly Warlick did not leave it in a terrible situation. In fact, I'm sure there's, a lot of coaches that probably wouldn't even have been fired for what she put up consistently each year. She got them to the tournament each year. She put up 20 wins each year except for this year. So, she was just let go because she didn't meet the standard that a Lady Vols coach needs to meet. So they need someone that's going to come in and win now. And I'm not saying Kelly Harper wouldn't be, But just going off of her past track record, she's the kind of coach that is a slow build coach that needs a few years to build up a team, and that's fine. But I suppose not in the circumstances that Tennessee's in right now, when you need someone to take this team that has all the talent in the world, who could probably, has talent to match Notre Dame and UConn. Maybe it wasn't developed as well as it obviously wasn't developed as well as their talent was, but Coach U in the first couple of years has them back in the top 10 consistently.
And just to put the finishing touches on kind of recapping both seasons, why don't you guys talk about who the Lady Vols are going to be losing, who they'll be getting going into next season from a player's perspective?
Yeah, player-wise, they're going to be losing. The two big ones are Sheridan Green and Mimi Jackson. They're also losing Kamara Harris, who never really played too much, and when she didn't play, she didn't do a whole lot because she played sparing minutes. But the two seniors they're losing that have a big impact are Mimi Jackson and Sheridan Green. I'd argue that Sheridan Green is probably a bigger loss because Mimi Jackson, she was a good player, she was a good leader, but she was streaky. She had some games where she'd put up, double-digit points, and then she'd have some games where she was pretty much a non-factor the entire time. She was a player that when she got hot, she could be pretty hot, and when she wasn't, she really wasn't. So, but Sheridan Green was consistently probably their best post presence this season. She, I think, had a streak where 9 out of 10 games she finished in double-digit rebounds. She had multiple double-doubles this season. She was just consistently a great post presence. And she was one of those players that likes to play defense, that likes to rebound, that likes to do those fundamental things that aren't necessarily flashy, but that need to be done. So she wasn't putting up monster scoring nights because that wasn't necessarily her role. But she was probably Tennessee's best defensive player, I'd argue that she was. She was definitely their best rebounder. And she was also a pretty good leader for the team. So I'd say she's probably their biggest loss in terms of production and consistency. In terms of what they have coming in, they've got another great recruiting class coming in. They've got the number 2 player in the nation, Jordan Horston, coming in. She was actually named the MVP at the McDonald's All-American game, so that's a pretty impressive accolade to have. And they've got her coming in. She's already signed, so unless she gets a hardship waiver and wants to transfer away, they've got her coming in. And they've got a pair of 6'5" post players in Tamara Key and Emily Saunders, who neither one of them played in the McDonald's All-American game, but they're nationally ranked prospects who provide height on the team that's kind of lacking in the height area. Like I said, both are 6'5", so they're going to be on the taller end of female basketball players, so they could have an impact immediately. But Horston would probably be the one to watch going forward.
Yeah, I'd say also, the team that they have now, and the 2 sophomores, Vina Westbrook and Renee Davis, and then also Zay Green and Mimi Collins will be they contributed a lot this year, especially kind of late in the year. Mimi Collins really took off and was a factor for them. Zay Green and I guess Renee were a little bit inconsistent at some points in the season, but Renee is a top scorer for the team, and Avina, I know her post-game comments will make it kind of an interesting offseason to see what she does, if she'll return to the team or decide to transfer. If she comes back, that'll be huge. And like Will said, with the recruiting class they already have, whoever comes in, the cupboard's not bare. They're going to come in with a very talented team with a lot of tools to work with.
Yeah, and for the Vols, they'll be losing 4 players off of this year's team. The 2 that kind of headline that is Admiral Schofield and Kyle Alexander. They'll also be losing Brad Woodson and Lucas Campbell. I do think walk-ons are a little underrated sometimes when you have good walk-ons that stay around all 4 years, because those are the guys that are pushing you in practice.
Leadership.
And Rick Barnes mentioned them as guys that were real leaders on this team. They'll be losing those 4 guys. Those are some big pieces to fill, especially Schofield. I mean, everybody talks about him. It's pretty clear what they'll lose in him. But coming into next year, I think the main thing to talk about is Jordan Bone and Grant Williams, whether those guys choose to declare for the NBA draft or not. I personally don't think either of them will. I think they'll go through the NBA draft process this summer like Admiral Schofield did last year. I think they'll learn from that. I don't think either of them will go, but both of them could go. One of them could go. I mean, it's kind of a toss-up, but I don't think either of them will.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm with you on that. If they'd be foolish for them not to test the draft process. Especially heading into your senior season. I think Admiral really learned a lot off of that. We saw him do stuff this year consistently that he had never done before since he arrived at Tennessee. So yeah, I do think. Like I said, there's a possible that both of them could go. One of them could go. I personally think they'll both come back too. Because if you look at it next year, they'll be it's going to be no question that they'll be the leaders of the team. But I think that replacing Kyle, yeah, obviously, you're not going to be able to replace what Admiral brought to the table because, he's arguably one of the best leaders in college basketball. But I think replacing Kyle is going to be a little bit more difficult than I originally had thought because, while he stayed in foul trouble consistently at the end of the season, they've got Derek Walker, John Fulkerson. Are either of those guys going to be able to provide the scoring? Albeit Kyle averaged around 8 points a game. Are either of them going to be able to approximate that? That's a big question I have going into next season. Who's going to replace Kyle? But at the end of the day, if Grant and Jordan Bones stay, which I think they will, I think they should be in pretty good shape next year. Jordan Bowden and Lamonte Turner will be back. They've had another year of experience under their belts, and they both, looked at times like they had improved up the last year. Lamonte was so-so at times, but I think they're in good position. Jordan Bone and Grant, all four of them going for the draft process. But I think at the end of the day, I think they'll both be back next year.
Yeah, and 5-star guard Josiah James
Yep.
coming in too. It's definitely going to be a guard-heavy team next year. And if Grant Williams goes, I think that could be a real concern for Tennessee because your best players are all going to be guards pretty much at that point. And maybe they run like a 4-guard lineup, something like that, and just kind of spread it out. I don't know. Rick Barnes in the past has not been a guy that wants to shoot a lot of threes. He wants to work it inside out. But I think that the way the team is setting up next year, he might need to kind of accept that. And we've seen it with Auburn this year. You can win a lot of games playing with guard heavy. And, sometimes you're going to get beat by 20 points because you shoot the ball bad. But you can also get hot and make a run, and that really matters in tournament-style play. So I think he might need to kind of accept that three-point shooting is going to be a strength of the team next year. Lamonte Turner, Jordan Bowden, those guys, we've seen it this year. So I think, if they kind of move to more of a guard-heavy offense, that could help them out. But, yeah, like you said, John Fulkerson, Derek Walker, one of those guys is really going to have to step up. I think you can throw Eve Pons in there, too, even though he's technically a guard. He can give you some minutes down low. So you need one of those guys to kind of really make a leap in the offseason. Jalen Johnson will be back.
Yep.
There's a lot of pieces coming into next season, and if you have 1, 2, or 3 of those guys really make a big improvement over the offseason, that could be huge for Tennessee going into next season. But you guys have anything else to add on the Lady Vols, or you got something?
Not the Lady Vols, but the AAF died today. So it was
Sad
a
day
strong
for Noah.
2-month run, 3-month run. And so we need to remember
It's
them.
a sad day for Noah Taylor, guys.
These are parting words for Noah. This is probably his last checkerboard chat of the
We'll see.
Of the year.
We'll see. That's up to Blake.
If you want to be back, we can talk about the AAF officially dying next week or something like that.
We always come up with good content, I think. So.
Always a good time.
But so moving forward, it'll probably be a lot of baseball and softball conversation from Will and I. We'll see what else we have to throw in there. Obviously, the orange and white game is coming up, so we'll probably preview that next week. But all of that will be coming up next week. We'll probably be without Corey and Noah. We thank them for their work on the basketball beat this year. But until next time, thanks for watching.